Now, as you've been hearing, the government is to review the GSOC bugging scandal, the role of the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission, and whether its structures are fit for purpose. Speaking about the controversy, Taoiseach Enda Kenny has expressed the need to restore public confidence in both the Commission and the Garda Síochána. But what measures are needed to evoke such trust, and can it be done? I'm joined by the Irish Times security analyst Tom Clonan. Tom, good morning.
Good morning, Pat.
Now, yesterday the Sunday Times had yet another story on it, and it seemed to clarify the provenance of the investigation.
It corroborates and reinforces everything that was in the public domain this time last week when we first addressed it here.
Even though Simon O'Brien, in his appearance before the committee, indicated that what might appear would not necessarily be at one with what it was his rationale for commissioning the investigation.
Well, certainly the, if you like, the rationale for carrying out the sweep, there is some disagreement about that, but the findings of the sweep, and this is the first principle of this story, this is the essential component which the government, through its spin, is trying to deflect from. GSOC, the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission, was surveilled in a number of ways. The bug on the chair's landline, the interference with telephony and email communication, but in a very sinister development, also this local area network which was set up, this 3G, what they call a catcher, an IMSI catcher device. Now, I spoke to some of my former colleagues over the weekend, and I'm told that an IMSI catcher of the type that was detected in the vicinity of GSOC, to set that up requires what they described as national technical means.
All right, so it has to be done with some sort of government approval, is that what you're saying?
Well, it belies a level, it has the footprint or the signature, a level of professionalism that you would associate with state agencies. Now roll back and look at what Minister Shatter did last week. Minister Shatter, in responding to this, failed to disclose all of the information that was at his disposal to the Dáil. And then he proceeded down a very Jesuitical route where he talked about lack of definitive evidence and so on.
That was the word, definitive.
Yeah, so he began to play, if you like, ducks and drakes with language in order to dilute the import of what was detected in the vicinity of GSOC. While on the other hand, his partner, Commissioner Callanan, goes to the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of rhetoric, and he cites no evidence and merely makes a blanket universal statement that no member of An Garda Síochána was either involved in either authorised or unauthorised bugging.
His contention was that such is the tight grip held on this kind of equipment by the Garda authorities, that no one could get a hold of that stuff without somebody knowing, and therefore presumably he would know.
Well, with respect, that statement is simply not credible. He mentions no investigation carried out to ascertain whether or not such an operation was carried out either overtly or covertly. He just makes a simple statement to the effect that it did not happen, and that is not credible. Now,
do you think, I mean, the kind of investigation would be make a few phone calls around and say, any of you lads borrow stuff you shouldn't have been borrowing over the last few months?
And that is precisely the type of investigation that was carried out in relation to clerical child sex abuse, where we were assured over decades that no such thing was carried on. We were told, you know, how appalling, how disgusting to ask such a question of a priest, a person with such standing in the community. And we're seeing the same type of rhetoric being mobilised by the Commissioner in the last week in his statements at Templemore and elsewhere. So basically,
you're saying you don't find either the Minister or the Commissioner credible?
There is only one way, and let the listeners understand this. I'm a retired army officer. I worked alongside An Garda Síochána in aid to the civil power operations prior to the ceasefires, and also in the immediate aftermath. I spent 2 years as a staff officer for the Chief of Staff. I attended the weekly intelligence brief every week, and every month I attended a very, very detailed intelligence briefing from the Director of Intelligence himself, and I understand how intelligence works, and I understand how it is analysed and parsed. What the Commissioner said makes no sense. It is not credible. Now, there is only one possible scenario in which the Commissioner's statements, his blanket statements, can make sense, and that is if the Commissioner knows who carried out such authorised or unauthorised surveillance. And that
you're saying that the only way he can make this statement is because he actually knows what happened?
Well, after Smithick, after the Smithick Tribunal into the 1989 murders of the two RUC officers, after Morris, we know it's a matter of public record that there is criminality within An Garda Síochána, within certain elements, that there is indiscipline, that they have engaged in the past in clandestine activities, that they have sought to deceive their superiors and investigating authorities. So on foot of that evidence, it is very difficult for me to believe a commissioner who says after 48 hours, without having carried out an investigation to my knowledge or without having referred to one, that he can say with 100% certainty that no member of An Garda Síochána has carried out unauthorised or authorised bugging. The only way you can make such a statement is if you know who did it. Now, I don't know whether he knows who did it or not. Could it have been G2, the Defence Forces? Could it have been another state actor? Could it have been a very elaborate surveillance operated by a subversive group? But if you drill down and look at the type of surveillance, and again, I'm not speaking about this as a layman. I'm speaking this, having considered this and being au fait with the manner in which intelligence is gathered. The temporary network, the intercept of telephony and mobile phones and emails, that's consistent with intelligence gathering as opposed to, let's say, acquiring evidence. It's not evidential in its kind of nature and scope.
It's wanting to know what's going on.
In real time. And if you look at the time period where this took place, this takes place at a time when GSOC were investigating very, very serious matters in relation to Kieran Boylan, a haulier and convicted drug smuggler.
Do you anticipate, therefore, that what will have to happen is that an elaboration will be offered by the Commissioner and an elaboration will be offered by the Minister in front of the committee as to what they now know, what they always knew, and why, in the interest of national security, they didn't want to tell us what they know? Is that what will save their skins? I
am sure that Minister Shatter, I saw his performance in Primetime last week where he described the chair of GSOC, his evidence as confusing. Or I think he implied that he might have been confused. This is a man who's a Cambridge degree, a Cambridge graduate, 2 postgrads. He was a commander in the London Metropolitan Police with responsibility for 11 boroughs. I watched his performance. He didn't appear confused to me. I've had a week to reflect on this. I'm not confused about this. There is something seriously amiss in relation to the administration of justice in this country. And I don't know who lies behind that. And Minister Shatter's behaviour in the last week, his utterances, the manner in which he uttered them, his body language, his mien, his petulance, his tetchiness, his patronising assertion about this, that and the other, he has created more doubt in my mind during the week than was the case this time 7 days ago.
However, he is not. He may be Minister for Justice, but he is not a technical expert. He's not a spook. But it's not like the head of MI5 or MI6.
He is responsible for everything that happens.
No, but maybe he just found a lot of this stuff to be pretty incredible and very thin, evidentially.
Well, after what we have been exposed to in our institutions in this country, we all know that an independent investigation is what is required here, and he has resisted that concept for a week. There have been calls from the opposition for a very, very simple... Now, look,
the reason you see, normally the attraction of an independent investigation is that you long finger everything. So it might be a couple of months before you set it up. It might be a year in doing its business. It might be frustrated along the way, and it's a long way away. The point of my question is, the reason you don't go for this long fingering thing is that there is something dodgy that might be uncovered one way or the other. Is that it?
Well, that's my problem. If you look at Alan Shatter's performance last week, could it be said, on balance, to have been, if you like, in the public interest in the sense that it restores confidence in An Garda Síochána and GSOC? No, it doesn't. And like I said, my father was a guard. My grandfather was a guard. I worked alongside An Garda Síochána as a staff officer. Now, when I see a Garda Síochána crest, I see a question mark. That's the net cumulative effect of Commissioner Callanan and Minister Shatter's performance last week. That's the effect on me. That's how I feel about it.
There is one further.
And that, to me, is unacceptable, and that is not consistent with one's role as a public servant, as a Minister for Justice, to create that type of...
Clearly we know there is a mole within GSOC. I mean, there's someone releasing the report that the Sunday Times got a hold of. I mean, how many people had sight of that, I don't know, unless you start looking around for the printers and publishers and all those sort of things and widen the scope of it. But it would appear that there is someone inside GSOC who is leaking. Whether that's in the interest of GSOC or in the interest of other parties is a question. Well, is that the investigation that they don't want to have?
Possibly. I mean, these are questions that need to be addressed to Minister Shatter and Commissioner Callanan. But at the end of the day, look, if I were tasked with carrying out an independent investigation, I would, all potential avenues of inquiry would have to be explored. Did the leak come from those who commissioned the report? Did the leak come from the people who actually prepared the report or were part of the team? Who knows? These are matters that require an independent, objective investigation.
But GSOC are doing their own investigation into the leak.
But from where I stand, if I, as a citizen and with my background, if I feel very uneasy about events this week, based almost exclusively on the performance of the Minister and the Commissioner, that surely is an unacceptable situation. I don't want to have to explain to my children, in my narrative of explaining on Garda Síochána, that their grandfather was a guard. But I don't want there to be a but or an if. And the only way we can remove this but or if is to have this independent investigation. And what I am concerned about is, why is the Minister resisting this? Why is he, and why is Commissioner...
It may be the only thing that will prevent further embarrassment, to anticipate and preempt his appearance at the committee by announcing an independent inquiry, which means that he would not go before the committee pending the findings of that independent inquiry.
Let's watch the choreography over the next day or two. But to be honest with you, Pat, and I said this last week, I've been writing about security and defence issues since 9/11, and I have never come across a story like this in relation to Ireland's internal security. What happened last week was very similar to what you'd expect in a Latin American junta. It is not the type of, if you like, dynamic or process that you would associate with a mature democracy within the European Union. And Minister Shatter needs to decide which is more important: fragile ego, embarrassment, or the public interest. And they were elected into office to serve the public. And I would say to Alan Shatter and Commissioner Callanan, straighten up and fly right.
Tom Analyst, Irish Times security analyst, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Coming up next, why are over 35...